Welcome back to the channel everyone. I'm really glad you're here today because this is one of those stories that sounds impossible at first, the kind that makes you lean closer to the screen and wonder how something so small, so ordinary, and so easily overlooked could ever be tied to a number as huge as $15 million, and today we're diving deep into the legend, the fascination, and the very real numismatic logic behind why a 2001 1-cent coin is sometimes said to be worth up to $15 million because of its errors and mistakes, exploring not only what people claim exists but also the kinds of extraordinary possibilities that would have to come together to push a humble penny into the realm of life-changing money, and to understand that we need to start by remembering what a 1-cent coin really represents in daily life. It is the lowest denomination of U.S. currency, often ignored, tossed into jars, left in parking lots, or forgotten in couch cushions, and precisely because of that, the idea that a single penny could rival the price of mansions, rare paintings, or entire businesses feels almost absurd, yet numismatics has always thrived on the tension between the ordinary and the extraordinary, because coins are mass-produced objects where perfection is the goal, and any deviation from that goal, if extreme enough and rare enough, can turn a mundane object into a historical artifact, and the year 2001 sits at a very interesting point in U.S. minting history, a time when the Lincoln cent had already been produced for over 90 years, when technology had become highly advanced, when quality control was supposedly tighter than ever, and when billions of cents were struck for circulation, making the idea of a catastrophic error slipping through all the more intriguing, and that's where the story of a $15 million 2001 penny begins. Not with a confirmed auction result or a neatly catalogued museum piece, but with whispered claims, collector speculation, and an understanding of just how extreme an error would need to be to justify such a valuation, because in the real numismatic market, value is driven by a combination of rarity, demand, condition, historical significance, and the nature of the error itself, and when people talk about a 2001 cent worth $15 million, they are not talking about a typical double die or an off-center strike that might sell for a few hundred or a few $1,000s, they are talking about a theoretical perfect storm of mistakes, a coin that should not exist at all, a coin that breaks multiple rules of minting simultaneously, and that's where things get fascinating, because when we examine the kinds of errors that could push a modern coin into the multi-million-dollar range, we start to see just how narrow that path really is. One possibility often discussed is the idea of a wrong planchet error combined with a transitional metal mistake. For example, imagine a 2001 Lincoln cent struck not on its intended copper-plated zinc planchet, but on a solid gold planchet prepared for another purpose, or even a silver or platinum planchet never meant for cents, and while such errors are extraordinarily rare, they are not entirely impossible, because the U.S. Mint handles multiple metals and denominations, and history has shown that wrong planchet strikes do happen. But for a 2001 cent to reach $15 million, it wouldn't just need to be struck on the wrong metal, it would need to be struck on a metal of immense intrinsic value, in pristine condition, and ideally be the only known example, because uniqueness is a powerful driver of price, and that leads us to the idea of a one-of-one error, a coin that is literally unique in the world, not just rare, but singular, because while there may be dozens of known 1943 copper cents, their values, while extremely high, do not reach $15 million, so the hypothetical 2001 cent would need to surpass even those legendary pieces in rarity and intrigue, and that brings up another possibility often floated in collector circles, the idea of a mule coin, which is a coin struck with mismatched dies intended for different denominations, like a cent obverse paired with a completely different reverse, and while the most famous modern mule involves a 2000 dated Sacagawea dollar obverse with a Washington quarter reverse, a 2001 cent mule would be even more shocking, because it would suggest a catastrophic breakdown in minting controls. Imagine a Lincoln cent obverse paired with a dime reverse, or even a foreign coin reverse, something that instantly defies explanation, and while mule coins are known and highly prized, their values typically reach into the hundreds of thousands or low millions at most, so to climb to 15 million, this hypothetical mule would need additional layers of error, perhaps being struck in gold, or bearing a date or mint mark combination that should be impossible, which leads us to the fascinating topic of date and mint mark impossibilities, because coins are anchored in time by their dates, and when a date contradicts known minting practices, collectors pay attention. For instance, if a 2001 cent somehow bore a mint mark from a facility that did not strike cents that year, or if it carried a proof-only finish while being clearly a circulation strike, that contradiction would raise serious questions and interest. But again, contradictions alone are not enough, they must be combined with extreme rarity and desirability, and that's where the concept of a hybrid error comes in, the idea that multiple major mistakes occurred in sequence, such as a mishubbed die creating a dramatic doubled design, followed by a wrong planchet, followed by an off-metal strike, followed by a misaligned die creating an unusual shape, all preserved in near-perfect condition. Because condition matters enormously, even the rarest coin loses value if it is heavily damaged, and for a 2001 penny to reach a valuation like $15 million, it would need to be not only bizarre but beautiful, a visual shock that immediately communicates that something is profoundly wrong in the most captivating way possible. And we also have to consider the psychological side of collecting, because value is not determined by rarity alone, but by the story collectors tell themselves and others about an object, and a 2001 cent has the advantage of being modern enough that its existence challenges assumptions. People expect incredible rarities to come from the early 1900s or the 1800s, not from their own lifetime, and that shock factor can dramatically increase demand, because collectors love the idea that treasure could still be hiding in plain sight, that the pocket change of yesterday could be the masterpiece of today. And when you combine that mindset with the global reach of modern media, auctions, and private collectors, you create a scenario where a single sensational coin can become a legend almost overnight, driving speculative valuation sky high, especially if wealthy collectors compete for the prestige of owning something no one else can. And that's another key point, because the upper end of the numismatic market is often driven by ultra-high net worth individuals who are not just buying coins, but buying status, history, and uniqueness, and for them, paying 8 figures for a once-in-a-lifetime object is not unthinkable. Especially if that object becomes a centerpiece of a world-class collection, and when people cite the $15 million figure, they are often imagining a private sale rather than a public auction, because private sales can reach levels that never appear in public records, and those sales are often fueled by intense secrecy and exclusivity, adding to the mystique. And we can't ignore the role of certification and authentication in all of this, because for any coin to command such a price, it would need to be authenticated by multiple top-tier grading services, studied by experts, published in journals, and debated in the numismatic community, and paradoxically, that scrutiny can increase value rather than diminish it, because controversy keeps an object in the spotlight. And the idea that a 2001 cent could challenge everything we think we know about modern minting is exactly the kind of controversy that keeps collectors talking for years. And then there's the possibility of a transitional error involving composition, because while the US cent composition officially changed in 1982, errors involving old stock, experimental metals, or test planchets have occurred in other years, and if a 2001 cent were somehow struck on a planchet intended for an experimental alloy never released to the public, that would elevate it from an error coin to a piece of secret history, a physical remnant of a decision-making process inside the mint that was never meant to be seen. And collectors place enormous value on artifacts that reveal hidden chapters of institutional history, and the more mysterious the origin, the more powerful the appeal. And that brings us to the idea of intentional versus unintentional errors, because while most mint errors are accidental, the discovery of a coin that suggests deliberate experimentation or a suppressed trial could ignite speculation far beyond normal collecting circles, drawing interest from museums, historians, and even the general public. And at that point, the coin stops being just a coin and becomes a cultural object, and cultural objects can command astonishing prices, especially when they are small, portable, and symbolic, and the penny is one of the most symbolic objects in American life. Next. 1996 1 cent, today, and I want you to settle in because what we're about to talk about sounds unbelievable on the surface, yet it captures everything that makes coin collecting, history, and hidden value so fascinating, and that is the story of how a 1996 1 cent coin, something most people would never look at twice, is sometimes described as being worth as much as $14 million because of a combination of errors, mistakes, and extraordinary possibilities that turn an everyday penny into a once-in-a-lifetime numismatic legend, and to really understand how that kind of value could even be imagined, we need to slow down and think about what a 1-cent coin represents, because the penny is the most common, most overlooked piece of American money, something people drop into jars, forget in cup holders, or leave behind at cash registers. And that is exactly why the idea of one being worth millions feels almost magical, as if the universe hid a treasure in plain sight. And the year 1996 is particularly interesting because it sits at a crossroads of modern minting, when the Lincoln cent was already a deeply established design, when minting technology was highly automated, and when billions of coins were being produced with the expectation of uniformity and precision, which means that any serious deviation from the norm becomes all the more shocking. And the claim that a 1996 penny could reach $14 million is not about a simple minor flaw, it's about imagining an error so extreme, so rare, and so historically intriguing that it breaks every expectation we have about modern coins, because in numismatics, value is driven by a combination of rarity, demand, condition, and story, and when people talk about a $14 million penny, they are really talking about a perfect storm of all four, beginning with rarity. Because for a modern cent to even approach 7 or 8 figures, it would need to be effectively unique, not one of a handful. Not one of a dozen, but possibly the only known example in existence, because modern coins are produced in such enormous quantities that rarity must be absolute to overcome that abundance, and that leads us into the types of errors that could theoretically create such uniqueness, starting with the idea of a wrong planchet error, where a coin is struck on a piece of metal intended for an entirely different denomination or purpose, and while wrong planchet errors are known and documented, they are usually struck on metals like nickel or dime planchets, which are interesting but not inherently valuable enough to justify millions, so for a 1996 cent to explode in value, the wrong planchet would need to be something extraordinary, such as a solid gold planchet prepared for a commemorative or experimental issue, or a platinum or silver blank never meant to be used for cents. And if such a coin were struck with full cent details, sharp design, and proper weight for that precious metal, it would instantly become one of the most astonishing mint errors ever discovered, because it would suggest that a highly valuable blank somehow made its way into the cent press, was struck, and then escaped the mint without being noticed, which already sounds improbable, but improbability is exactly what drives extreme value, and then we layer on the idea of a transitional metal error, because while the cent composition officially changed years earlier, the mint has a long history of experimenting with metals, testing alternatives, and producing trial planchets, and if a 1996 cent were struck on an experimental alloy that was never publicly released, that would elevate the coin from an error to a piece of hidden history, a physical artifact of a decision-making process that collectors were never supposed to see, and collectors place enormous value on objects that reveal unseen chapters of institutional history, especially when those objects are small, portable, and symbolically powerful, and the penny is one of the most symbolically powerful coins in American culture, associated with thrift, luck, and everyday life, so transforming that symbol into a multi-million-dollar artifact carries a kind of poetic irony that collectors find irresistible. And then there's the concept of a mule coin, which is when mismatched dies intended for different coins are paired together. And while mule coins are rare, they are not unheard of, but for a 1996 penny mule to approach $14 million, it would need to be a mule of unprecedented absurdity, such as a Lincoln cent obverse paired with a reverse from an entirely different denomination or even a foreign coin, something that immediately defies explanation and challenges our understanding of mint procedures, because such a coin would suggest not just a mistake, but a systemic failure in quality control. And when combined with other errors, that failure becomes historically significant, and historical significance multiplies value. And another possibility often discussed in speculative circles is the idea of a dramatic double die error, but not the subtle doubling collectors usually see, rather an extreme, bold, unmistakable doubling that affects major design elements, dates, and lettering in a way that can be seen instantly without magnification. And while double die errors exist for many years, including the 1990s, a truly dramatic double die combined with other major errors could create a coin that stands far above typical examples, and then we have to consider die alignment errors, such as rotated dies or misaligned strikes, where the design is off-center or the obverse and reverse are not properly aligned, and while these errors are often visually striking, they are usually not valuable enough on their own to command millions. But again, the key is combination, because when multiple major errors occur on a single coin, the result is something that should not exist at all, and numismatists are drawn to objects that challenge the boundaries of possibility, and the more rules a coin breaks, the more fascinating it becomes. And then there's the idea of date and mint mark impossibilities, because coins are anchored in time by their dates and places of manufacture, and if a 1996 cent bore a mint mark from a facility that did not produce cents that year, or displayed a combination of design elements that contradict official records, that contradiction would instantly attract expert scrutiny, debate, and attention, and debate itself can increase value, because controversy keeps an object in the spotlight, and the numismatic community thrives on discussion, disagreement, and analysis, and a coin that sparks years of debate becomes famous, and fame drives demand, and demand drives price, especially at the top end of the market where wealthy collectors compete not just for ownership, but for prestige. And that brings us to the psychological side of extreme coin values, because at the multi-million-dollar level, buyers are not just purchasing metal, they are purchasing status, legacy, and the right to say they own something no one else does. And if a 1996 penny were truly unique, truly inexplicable, and truly authenticated beyond doubt, it could become the centerpiece of a world-class collection. And collectors at that level are willing to pay extraordinary sums for objects that elevate their collections into the realm of legend, and private sales often reach levels that never appear in public auction records, which is why figures like $14 million are often discussed in theoretical or private sale contexts rather than confirmed auction results. And then there's the issue of condition, because even the rarest error loses value if it is heavily damaged or worn, and for a 1996 cent to reach such a staggering valuation, it would need to be in near perfect or perfect condition, with sharp details, minimal contact marks, and strong eye appeal, because beauty matters, even in error coins, and collectors are drawn to pieces that are not only rare, but visually captivating. And a coin that looks chaotic yet crisp, wrong yet well preserved, creates a powerful emotional response, and emotion plays a huge role in high-end collecting. And we also have to consider authentication and certification, because no coin reaches 8 figures without being rigorously examined by multiple experts, grading services, and researchers, and that process can actually enhance value, because a coin that withstands intense scrutiny and remains unexplained gains credibility and mystique is priceless in the collectibles world. And then there's the broader cultural context of the 1990s, because the decade represents a bridge between the analog past and the digital future, and coins from that era occupy an interesting psychological space. They feel modern enough to be familiar, yet old enough to carry nostalgia, and a spectacular error from 1996 taps into that duality, reminding people that even in an age of automation and computers, human systems are never perfect, and those imperfections can become treasures. And that idea resonates deeply with collectors and the general public alike, and we cannot ignore the role of storytelling and myth-making in all of this, because stories about multi-million-dollar pennies spread quickly, especially online, inspiring people to search their change, talk to friends, and dream about discovery. And while many such stories are exaggerated or speculative, they are rooted in real principles of numismatic value, and they highlight how mistakes. Next. 1995 D1 cent, today, because this is one of those stories that sounds unbelievable at first but keeps pulling you in the longer you listen. And if you love rare coins, hidden treasures, and the idea that something small in your pocket could secretly be worth more than a mansion, a private jet, and a lifetime of dreams combined, then settle in, because today we are talking about the legendary 1995 D1 cent that has been whispered about in collecting circles as a coin that could reach an astonishing $13 million due to a perfect storm of errors, mistakes, and extraordinary possibilities that challenge everything people think they know about modern coins. And while this story blends documented minting science with collector speculation, it represents why numismatics is as much about imagination and discovery as it is about metal and dates. Because the idea begins with the simple fact that most people think modern pennies are boring, mass-produced, and practically worthless. Yet history has proven again and again that a single deviation at the mint, a microscopic change in metal composition, a misaligned die, or an undocumented experimental process can turn a 1-cent coin into an object of obsession, and the 1995 cent sits at the center of one of the most fascinating what-if discussions in the hobby. Because 1995 was a year when the Denver Mint was producing billions of Lincoln cents using high-speed equipment, copper-plated zinc planchets, and die. Steel that was pushed hard to meet demand, and when systems are pushed to their limits, mistakes become more likely, and those mistakes are exactly where extreme value can be born, starting with the possibility of a transitional composition error, which is one of the biggest factors that could drive a coin into the multi-million-dollar range. Because while official records say that all 1995 cents were struck on copper-plated zinc planchets, collectors know that mints sometimes test alloys, reuse leftover planchets, or accidentally mix stock from previous years, and if a genuine 1995 cent were discovered struck on a solid copper or bronze planchet matching pre-1982 composition, the rarity would be almost incomprehensible, since such an error would require not only the survival of obsolete planchets for more than a decade but their accidental introduction into a modern production line, and when similar situations have occurred in the past, such as the famous 1943 bronze cent or the 1944 steel cent, the market has proven willing to assign values in the millions, especially when the coin is authenticated, graded at a high level, and surrounded by a compelling story, and the Denver Mint mark adds another layer of intrigue because unlike the Philadelphia Mint, Denver did not officially produce certain error varieties in other years, making any major deviation stand out even more sharply, but composition alone is not the only factor, because the 1995 date is already famous for the double die obverse variety from Philadelphia, where the doubling on the word liberty and the date is bold and dramatic, and while that variety is not from Denver, it demonstrates that the master dies of that year were vulnerable to hubbing issues, which opens the door to speculation that a unique Denver double die, far more extreme than anything publicly known, could exist but remain undiscovered, possibly locked away in a roll, a jar, or a forgotten collection, and if such a coin displayed a dramatic multi-directional doubling affecting the entire obverse portrait, legends, and date, combined with additional errors like die rotation or misalignment, the uniqueness alone could justify a valuation that breaks every modern cent record, because collectors at the highest level are not just buying metal, they are buying the singularity of an object that cannot be replicated, and this leads directly into the realm of multiple simultaneous errors, which is where values can escalate exponentially. Because while single errors are fascinating, coins that show 2, 3, or even 4 different minting mistakes at once are exponentially rarer, and the hypothetical $13,001,995 cent is often described in collector lore as a coin that could combine a wrong planchet error with a dramatic double die, an off-center strike, and a die cap or struck-through error, creating a visual and technical anomaly that defies probability, and when you understand how coins are made, you realize just how unlikely this is, because each stage of the minting process is designed to prevent exactly these kinds of outcomes, so for all of them to fail simultaneously would require an almost impossible chain of events, which is exactly why collectors dream about it, and why such a coin, if verified, would become a once-in-a-generation discovery, but the story does not stop there. Because another possibility that fuels the valuation is the idea of a mule error, where a coin is struck with mismatched dies not intended to be paired together, such as an obverse from one denomination and a reverse from another, or a die from a different year, and while mule errors are more commonly associated with dollar coins and foreign issues, they are not impossible for cents, and a 1995 cent with a mismatched reverse design, perhaps a prototype or experimental reverse never meant for circulation, would instantly become one of the most important modern errors ever found. Especially if it could be traced to a short-lived test run or undocumented die trial at the Denver Mint, and the Mint has a long history of experimenting quietly, often leaving behind anomalies that only surface years later, and then there is the possibility of a wrong metal entirely, not just bronze but something exotic like aluminum, steel, or even a high nickel alloy. And while official records may deny such experiments, collectors know that the Mint tested aluminum cents in the 1970s and that off-metal strikes have occurred in nearly every decade, and if a 1995 cent were struck on a planchet intended for a foreign coin or another denomination, the legal and historical implications alone would drive intense bidding among elite collectors and institutions, especially if the coin were the only known example, and this ties into another powerful factor, which is condition. Because error coins are often found in circulated or damaged states, but a $13 million cent would almost certainly need to survive in near-perfect or mint-state condition, preserving sharp details, original luster, and clear evidence of the error, which would suggest that it was pulled from production early or set aside intentionally, raising questions about how it escaped the mint and who might have known about it, and mystery adds value in ways that price guides can never fully quantify. And speaking of mystery, one of the most compelling aspects of the 1995 cent legend is the idea of an undocumented prototype or presentation strike, possibly created for internal review, testing new dies, plating processes, or strike pressures, and never intended to leave the facility, because mints around the world have a history of producing such pieces, often without clear records, and when one surfaces decades later, it can rewrite what we thought we knew about a given year. And if such a prototype were mistakenly released or quietly taken by an employee, its existence would challenge official narratives and ignite enormous interest, and collectors are drawn to coins that challenge authority and accepted history, because they represent the thrill of discovery and the idea that there is always more to learn. And then there is the plating itself, because modern cents rely on a thin copper plating over zinc, and errors in plating thickness, bonding, or composition can create dramatic visual effects, such as peeling, bubbling, or exposed zinc cores, but in extreme cases, a plating error could result in an unusually thick copper layer that mimics solid copper in weight and appearance, and if such a coin were initially dismissed and later proven to be a unique plating anomaly, its value could skyrocket, especially if it confounded standard testing methods and required advanced analysis to understand, and advanced analysis is another area where value grows. Because coins that demand X-ray fluorescence, metallurgical studies, and academic papers to explain them often become famous within the hobby, and fame drives demand, and demand drives price, and the $13 million figure often mentioned in discussions is not just about raw rarity, but about the potential for the coin to become the most talked about modern error ever, featured in museums, documentaries, and high-profile auctions, where wealthy collectors compete not just to own the coin, but to own the story. And stories matter deeply in numismatics, because every great coin has a narrative that extends beyond its physical properties, and the narrative of a 1995 cent defying modern minting precision, slipping through quality control, and surviving unnoticed for years is incredibly powerful. And when you add the fact that pennies are so often ignored, tossed aside, or stored without care, the idea that a life-changing fortune could hide in plain sight becomes almost poetic. And this is why people continue to search rolls, jars, and collections, because even if the $13 million cent has never been confirmed publicly, the possibility keeps the hunt alive, and the hunt itself is part of the value, because it inspires education, curiosity, and engagement with history. And another angle that feeds into the valuation discussion is the role of grading services. Last 1987 1 cent coin, today, because what we have lined up is a story that is as fascinating as it is almost unbelievable, a story that combines history, chance, and the tiny details of minting precision into a phenomenon that has captured the imagination of collectors, historians, and treasure hunters around the world. And if you think a single penny is just a small, ordinary coin that jingles in your pocket and barely buys a piece of candy, think again, because today we are diving deep into the legend of the 1987 1 cent, a coin that in certain circles is whispered to be worth as much as $12 million, not because of its age, not because of precious metals, but because of a perfect storm of errors, mistakes, anomalies, and possibilities that transform what would normally be a humble copper-colored disc into one of the most sought-after modern rarities in numismatic history. And this story begins with understanding the context of the 1987 production at the Denver Mint, which was producing Lincoln cents in the billions using the standard copper-plated zinc planchets that had become the norm after 1982, and the minting equipment, although highly automated and precise, was not infallible, because when machines are pushed to high-volume production with minimal downtime, errors are inevitable, and these errors, whether minor or extreme, are exactly what collectors look for, because they create anomalies that the public rarely sees and that the mint itself may never officially acknowledge. And in the case of the 1987 cent, there are several categories of mistakes and possibilities that, if they occurred simultaneously or in particularly dramatic form, could justify a valuation in the multi-million-dollar range, starting first with planchet errors, because while nearly all 1987 cents were struck on standard copper-plated zinc discs, there is always the possibility that an off-metal planchet was introduced into the production line, whether by leftover stock from experimental tests, a mix-up in inventory, or an unnoticed batch from an earlier era, and if such a coin were struck on a solid copper planchet or a planchet of unusual composition, such as aluminum or high nickel content, its rarity would be astronomical, because surviving off-metal strikes from this period are exceedingly rare, and their discovery tends to make headlines in the numismatic world, and collectors are willing to pay extraordinary sums for them, particularly when the coin is authenticated and graded in near-perfect condition, because the survival of a pristine example suggests it was removed early from circulation or handled with unusual care, which adds another layer of intrigue and scarcity. And beyond the composition, there is the possibility of die errors, which are another major driver of value, because every coin is struck using dies, and any imperfection in those dies, whether it be a hubbing misalignment, a crack, a chip, or a doubling of the design elements, can create a unique coin that cannot be reproduced. And in 1987, collectors have long speculated about the existence of extreme double die obverse or reverses, particularly from the Denver Mint, because that facility, while known for quality control, was also under pressure to produce massive quantities of coins quickly, and when speed and precision collide, mistakes like die doubling can slip through undetected. And if a 1987 cent were discovered with dramatic, multi-directional doubling affecting the lettering, date, and Lincoln portrait, it would instantly become one of the most significant modern errors ever found, and the combination of such doubling with other anomalies, such as a misaligned strike, off-center strike, or die rotation, can exponentially increase a coin's value, because collectors prize coins that are visually striking, technically fascinating, and historically unique, and when multiple errors coincide on a single piece, the likelihood of finding another example is vanishingly small, making it a true once-in-a-lifetime collectible. And then there is the possibility of a mule error, which occurs when a coin is struck with mismatched dies not intended to be paired together, such as an obverse from one denomination and a reverse from another, or dies from different years. And while mule errors are rare, they are legendary when they do occur, because they challenge what we think we know about minting processes and reveal hidden stories of experimentation, oversight, or even chaos in the minting process. And if a 1987 cent were discovered as a mule, perhaps paired with an experimental reverse or a design intended for a pattern coin, it would not only be historically significant but would likely ignite a global bidding war among top collectors, because the combination of uniqueness, historical mystery, and aesthetic intrigue creates an irresistible package. And the possibilities do not stop there, because plating errors also play a huge role in valuation, particularly with modern cents, which are copper-plated zinc, and errors in the plating process, such as incomplete coverage, excessive thickness, or adhesion problems, can reveal the underlying zinc core in dramatic ways, or create a coin that visually appears to be solid copper, adding another layer of technical curiosity that drives collector interest. And in some cases, coins with extreme plating anomalies are essentially one-of-a-kind, and when authenticated and graded, they can fetch sums that are almost impossible to imagine, especially when combined with other errors such as die doubling, off-center strikes, or planchet composition anomalies. And another fascinating possibility involves the survival of presentation or prototype strikes that were never intended for circulation, because mints often test dies, experiment with metal composition, or strike coins to inspect the effects of pressure and design before rolling out mass production, and these internal tests sometimes escape official records, leaving room for speculation about coins that may exist in private hands, unknown to the public. And the discovery of a 1987 cent from such an undocumented experiment would create a media sensation, scholarly interest, and a frenzy among elite collectors, all of which contribute to astronomical valuations. And condition is yet another crucial factor, because while error coins are often found in circulated or damaged states, a hypothetical $12 million coin would almost certainly need to survive in near-perfect mint state, preserving crisp details, original luster, and clear evidence of the errors or anomalies, which suggests careful handling and extreme rarity, and rarity combined with perfection is what drives coins into the upper echelons of the market, because collectors are not simply buying metal. They are buying uniqueness, history, and the irreplaceable nature of an object that defies replication, and another dimension of value comes from the story itself, because coins with compelling narratives, particularly those involving improbable survival, extreme errors, and historical intrigue, often command higher prices than coins that are merely scarce, and the legend of the 1987 D1 cent is steeped in this type of narrative, because it asks us to imagine the improbable. A coin slipping through the minting process unnoticed, surviving decades in perfect condition, and exhibiting one or multiple errors that were never documented and may never be reproduced, and this narrative adds psychological value, because collectors are drawn to the mystery, the hunt, and the prestige of owning a coin that challenges our understanding of modern minting, and when you consider the scale of modern coin production, where billions of pennies are minted each year, the idea that a single coin could deviate so dramatically from the expected standard is almost magical, and this rarity, combined with visual impact, historical curiosity, and technical fascination, is exactly what can justify a valuation in the millions, and then there are extreme scenarios where multiple anomalies coincide on the same coin, which is where value skyrockets even further, because a 1987 D cent that simultaneously displayed off-metal composition, dramatic double die elements, off-center strike, misaligned dies, and plating irregularities would be considered effectively unique in the history of numismatics, and the market consistently rewards such uniqueness at extraordinary levels, as we have seen with other high-profile examples from earlier decades, where coins with single anomalies have reached millions, and coins with multiple anomalies have shattered previous records, and beyond the physical and technical aspects, there is also the consideration of grading and authentication, because a coin of this magnitude must be verified by the top-tier professional grading services, and once encapsulated and authenticated, it enters the permanent numismatic record, creating confidence for buyers and institutions alike, and population reports showing a single known example immediately propel a coin into the category of the most desirable collectibles on Earth, because scarcity, certification, and documentation are the pillars of high-end coin collecting, and when you combine these factors with historical context, production anomalies, and the thrill of potential discovery, the result is a coin that could easily command $12 million or more, especially in a high-profile auction where collectors, museums, and investors compete not just to purchase metal, but to own a singular piece of history that embodies chance, mystery, and technical marvel, and the very existence of such a coin sparks ongoing research.